We begin in Colombia, where the final preparations are being made for Sunday's parliamentary elections. Voters will be electing members of both the Senate and the lower house, and they will be followed by the presidential election in May. These are the first national elections in Colombia since the signing of a peace deal with the FARC. But polls indicate that the quality of education and health, high unemployment and inequality rank higher in concern among Colombians than the implementation of the peace accords with the FARC. Colombian authorities have shut the borders with the neighboring countries ahead of the vote. They say they want to avoid any distractions during the elections. The authorities stress that only the land borders have been affected.
Remember, in these electoral days, historically, the borders have been closed. Not only the borders where we are today in La Guajira, the borders with Ecuador, Peru, Brazil, and Venezuela have also been closed. We have always closed all these checkpoints. Remember that these are terrestrial and fluvial crossings. The air and maritime checkpoints continue to operate without any problem.
Colombia's largest remaining guerrilla group, the ELN, has begun a unilateral ceasefire ahead of Sunday's elections. The ELN said the ceasefire would last until the 13th of this month and was a gesture of respect for voters. The Colombian government, however, has said it will continue military operations against the guerrillas. The ELN is calling on the government to return to the peace talks in Ecuador, which it broke off earlier this year.
I hope that the guerrilla group, which has not yet negotiated a peace deal, will reflect and understand this is the way taken by the FARC, which declared a ceasefire during elections. I hope they respect it. And then we will have the most peaceful elections in our history.
For a look at what's at stake on Sunday, let's cross to Jose Manuel Jimenez in Bogota.
This Sunday, Colombians will choose the new Congress. There are 102 seats up for grabs in the Senate and 166 in the House of Representatives, a total of 268 lawmakers. This number was increased in a decision by the Colombian government and the FARC in the Havana agreements. The deal guarantees 10 seats for the FARC in the Congress of the Republic, half of them in the Senate and the other half in the House of Representatives. Colombians will also decide on Sunday the presidential candidates through bipartisan consultations. The right wing is holding the first ones. Their candidates are Iván Duque, Marta Lucía Ramírez, and the former attorney Alejandro Ordóñez. The second consultation comes from the Colombian left wing, with Dr. Jaime Caicedo and Dr. Gustavo Petro. So, next Monday, Colombia will wake up with a new political scene to face the presidential elections on May 27th.
We spoke to Jose Antonio Figueroa, a research professor at the Central University of Ecuador and PhD in Latin American Cultural Studies at Georgetown University. He said two key issues continue to dog Colombia: paramilitarism and agrarian reform, and the combination of the two could lead to electoral fraud.
Today, paramilitarism continues to exert power in rural areas due to the abandonment of the state of vast regions of the country because of the displacement of FARC, the mobilized guerrillas who have abandoned regions which have been immediately taken by the paramilitary groups. The growth of coca production that has been increasing dramatically during the government of Juan Manuel Santos, and the consolidation of the extreme right at the national level that opposes the agrarian reform. That is one of the most important points of the Havana negotiation between Juan Manuel Santos and FARC. As a last point, I would like to remark that paramilitarism and the rural and urban violence that it promotes are factors that help strongly to consolidate fraud in many senses. And in a country with a voluntary vote, the armed groups force the peasants or the poor sectors to deposit their vote for those who the paramilitaries decide. The paramilitaries retain voters' identification documents and also buy votes and displace voters from one municipality to another in a phenomenon in Spanish known as transhumancia de votos. It's a kind of migration of votes from one municipality to another. Those among the big problems produced by the presence of paramilitarism and its connection with fraud.
And the Colombian election process was further undermined when the FARC political party announced that it would pull out of the presidential polls. Members say they are at risk because they're on the ballot.
In an official statement Thursday, the party noted it's been suffering threats during the campaign. But more notably, the main reason for pulling out is Rodrigo Londoño's illness.
Our current circumstances are already known by the public. The recovery process that our candidate Dimo needs to go through, together with the threats we have received during the campaign, have pushed us to pull out from our presidential aspirations.
Over 50 FARC members have been murdered since the Havana agreements were signed. The political party urged the national government to guarantee their safety and access to funds so they can participate in the democratic process.
The framework is there to get the funds, and they were enacted some days ago, but there are restrictions from the Colombian Agrarian Bank, like preemptive audits and co-administration of our finances.
The FARC also still needs to discuss if it wants to forge alliances with other political forces.
We have to wait, but we have already said that we are open to dialogue. We want to talk to other forces that also wish the best for Colombia, and we hope that they are open to talk to us too.
According to human rights activist Jorge Rojas, FARC's decision is bad news for the peace process.
It will be good for the FARC to run with another candidate to see how they work in the democratic scene. It is also true that they are still running for Congress anyway. Let's see how much support they get and how they move in the political scene.
Analysts and social organizations are wondering what kind of democracy Colombia has, where the government guarantees participation to opposition and social movements, but the killing of social leaders continues. The Colombian people have the chance to make a change in the country and start a new chapter in its history in which peace agreements are a reality. José Manuel Jiménez, Telesur, Bogotá, Colombia.
The FARC leader, Rodrigo Londoño, is recovering in hospital after his recent health scare. He tweeted this video of himself taking his first steps in hospital after surgery. He says he's relieved to be able to move. Cubans are also voting on Sunday. 18 million people will cast their vote for members of the provincial and national assemblies. Our correspondent Laura Prada has sent this report from Havana.
Hello, yes, nice to greet you from Havana. Indeed, yesterday the electoral authorities of the island informed that the country is ready for this Sunday election, this second edition of the general elections. This Sunday, Cubans will be electing from the 1,265 nominees for delegates for the provincial assemblies and the 605 deputies for the National Assembly, the Parliament of the island. Also, they said that the more than 200,000 electoral authorities are already in all the provinces of the country to guarantee that these elections are successful as expected. Today is the final day of the trips of these nominees throughout the communities of the country, and the ballots will start being delivered to all the more than 24,470 electoral polling stations of the island. We'll continue to inform you what is going on, how are the final touches to these Sunday elections.
We thank Laura Prada for that report. Early voting begins in Grenada ahead of Tuesday's elections. Police officers are allowed to vote early to ensure they're out in full force on election day. 874 officers are registered to vote. The police ballots will not be counted until the day of the election. Meanwhile, the OAS and CARICOM observers say they've been monitoring media and conducting interviews with stakeholders to ensure everything runs smoothly. And the recently formed opposition group made up of representatives from Venezuela's fractured right-wing coalition have called for nationwide protests at the end of the month. The move comes just as the country is starting to prepare for presidential elections in May. Freddie Gillingham has the latest.
Some familiar faces from Venezuela's opposition bloc managed to forget their differences for a few hours on Thursday night. Standing side by side, the newly formed group, known as the Broad Front for a Free Venezuela, gave a widely publicised announcement on at least one political strategy they all agree on.
I want to say that it is okay. I welcome the idea of the coalition, but we must understand that the government will not be overthrown through classic, either modern, democratic methods.
Protests have been called for March 17th. This could be their first significant demonstration since last year, when opposition protesters answered the calls of their leaders to take to the streets. However, after months of violent protests, which left over 100 people dead, many of their core support base lost faith. At the end of last year, President Maduro's ruling PSUV trounced the opposition across the board in both state and municipal elections. Unable to swing elections in their favour, the opposition coalition bloc, known as the MUD, have since grown increasingly desperate as election day looms. Calls to boycott the presidential elections in May have almost certainly diminished their chance of voter turnout. However, not all are playing ball. Some opposition parties defied consensus late last month and fielded candidates. Henry Falcon, by far the most established opposition candidate to run in the election, is urging supporters to come out and vote to defeat the government at the ballot box.
We will defeat the National Electoral Council, we will defeat the government of Nicolás Maduro, and we will defeat abstention and cheating.
With opposition now more divided than ever, this call to the streets may be the opposition's swan song. Freddie Gillingham, Telesur, Caracas.
Antigua and Barbuda has withdrawn from the second preparatory meeting for the Summit of the Americas to be held in Peru in April. Sir Ronald Sanders, Antigua and Barbuda's ambassador to the Organization of American States, said this decision was made out of principle after Venezuela was excluded from the meetings without any explanation. Sanders said the country will take part in meetings when the situation is rectified. Well, we'll now take a short break, but join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Welcome back. In Paraguay, the Senate has approved the Democratic Equality Law Bill, which will enable more women to participate in political decision-making.
Women's groups gather outside the Paraguayan Congress to demand their political rights through the approval of the Democratic Equality Law. The law's passing coincided with International Women's Day.
We are here for many reasons. Firstly, for democracy. Secondly, for equality. Thirdly, because Paraguay's population is 50 and 50, and women must be represented in Congress where the budget and laws are made.
Senator Esperanza Martinez, a member of the group which sponsored the Equality Law, defends the project in Paraguay. The political representation of women stands at only 16% for elected positions.
We do not want to be behind or ahead, but we want to have our fair share of the responsibilities of the state, because we can't transform a society if we don't have power, and the political power has been historically united to women.
The women celebrated the approval of the law of democratic equality, marking the historic event.
It's a way of claiming the right for women. On a day like today, on the 8th of March, we know that women and comrades worldwide have made a range of demands on various issues.
The Equality Law Bill, which establishes the equal participation of men and women, not only in Parliament, but also in civil society, will now go to the Chamber of Deputies to be approved and shall then be implemented by the executive power.
Bolivia has created a 244-meter-long flag believed to be the largest in the world in a bid to draw support for its maritime claim against Chile. The huge flag, called a banderazo, weighs an estimated 244 tons. It will be carried by 60 activists, 17,000 soldiers, and 3,000 police officers. President Evo Morales plans to use the flag at 3 official events. The border dispute is before the International Court of Justice.
The feeling I have is that I was taught from grade school that we must recover our path to the sea. But up to now, nothing much has been done. I think that this government made progress. There is a court case at the international level. I call on people to take part in these events to unify us as the Bolivian brothers that we are.
Around 200 prisoners in Honduras have begun a riot to demand better treatment and facilities. The prisoners in the Porvina jail in northeast Tegucigalpa are demanding better food and sanitation and protection from dangerous gang leaders. Families of the inmates have called on authorities to take emergency measures. And a helicopter has crashed in a residential street in Joinville in southern Brazil, killing 3 people and injuring 1. Authorities say the crash followed an attempt to hijack the helicopter to be used in a jailbreak. Police found 2 firearms in the wreckage, and witnesses report hearing gunshots coming from the craft. The helicopter was run by an air taxi company and was used for sightseeing. Relatives of the Mexican artist Frida Kahlo have criticized the toy company Mattel for their depiction of the iconic painter as a Barbie doll. Mattel has launched a range of new Barbie dolls based on inspiring women, Kahlo among them. But Maura Romero, the great niece of Frida Kahlo, says Mattel was not authorized to create the doll, and it fails to correctly depict some of Kahlo's key facial features, such as her dark eyes, heavy eyebrows, and facial hair. Residents in Tultepec, on the outskirts of Mexico City, celebrated the patron saint of fireworks, San Juan de Dios, on Thursday. Firework castles in the shape of bulls paraded through the town streets and later detonated. Tultepec is considered Mexico's capital of pyrotechnics. Local workshops produce about 80% of the country's fireworks. The 22-year-old Venezuelan track and field athlete Yulimar Rojas, who won gold in the women's triple jump at the World Championships in England, has returned home. The reigning indoor and outdoor world champion danced with children at an event and news conference welcoming her home. Shortly after winning gold, Rojas recalled the memory of former Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez, calling him a fundamental pillar for the development of sports in Venezuela. We're going to take another short break, but join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Back. The streets of Afrin were alive with celebration on Thursday following the reported arrival of Syrian Democratic Forces troops who are allegedly being brought in to help fight against the Turkish offensive. Footage shows buses and cars filled with civilians who have traveled to Afrin from Shingal, Qamishli, Al-Hakshka, Amuda and Kobani. According to local reports, SDF fighters are allegedly leaving the front in Deir ez-Zor region to join Kurdish forces fighting Turkish troops in Afrin. U.S. President Donald Trump has signed a proclamation bringing in tariffs of 25% on steel and 10% on aluminium. The tariffs will go into effect in 15 days. White House officials say the tariffs are an essential part of domestic and economic security. Canada and Mexico are exempt from the tariffs till a new NAFTA agreement comes up. But the controversial tax plan has triggered strong reactions from across the world. Brazil, the second largest supplier of steel to the United States, has said it will take all necessary bilateral and multilateral actions to preserve its rights and interests. In a tweet, the Brazilian National Federation of Industry condemned the duties. Earlier this year, Brazil reminded Washington that it is the biggest importer of U.S. coal. The government has added that it hasn't ruled out retaliatory action. And China has warned the decision could trigger a trade war. It says this is trade protectionism masked as international security. The European Union expects to be excluded from the tariffs. It has threatened to lodge a complaint with the World Trade Organization.
We will have to protect our industry with rebalancing measures, safeguards, and we are also preparing with the member states a list of rebalancing measures that could possibly enter into force. We hope that will not be the case, of course, because nobody has an interest of escalating this situation, but if we have to do that, that is what we will do.
Spain's Supreme Court has turned down a request from Catalan leader Jordi Sanchez to be released from jail so he can be sworn in as the region's new president next week. Sanchez was jailed on sedition charges after October's independence referendum, which was deemed illegal by Madrid. Sanchez was nominated as Catalonia's leader after Carles Puigdemont abandoned his attempt to be reappointed. Now let's have a look at some other stories making headlines from around the world.
Thousands of people took to the streets of Benin's commercial capital, Cotonou, on Friday, they are protesting against President Patrice Talon's economic reforms and the high cost of living. Talon's proposals for free market reform have sparked widespread concern, leading to a series of public sector strikes across the country. Hundreds of activists rallied in the streets of New Delhi to protest against the Bharatiya Janata Party, or BJP, for demolishing statues of Vladimir Lenin in the northeastern Indian state of Tripura. There's been a spate of violence and vandalism across the country against statues of other social and political icons.
For us, Lenin is not just a statue. Lenin is an ideology. And we know that that ideology cannot be vanquished. We need it in India. The entire working people of the world need that ideology.
The Pyeongchang Winter Paralympics has begun in South Korea with a beautiful display of fireworks. This year's event is the biggest Paralympics to date. 567 athletes from 48 countries are participating. They will compete in 6 disciplines: alpine skiing, biathlon, cross-country skiing, para-ice hockey, snowboarding, and wheelchair curling.
Well, we've come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at telsutv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Soini Gray. Thank you so much for watching.